Hello everybody and welcome back to Math 7. So yesterday we took a deep dive into the translations, which was a fancy word for slide. So the shape stayed the same, but we just slid it into a new position based on what we were told, and then we were able to come up with a rule in order to figure out what that slide may have been, what direction and how many units we had to move it. So remember that a transformation is the change in the size, shape, or orientation of a figure. And so the first that we did yesterday was translations, like I just said, and today we are taking a look at our second transformation, which is a reflection. So reflection is just a fancy word for flip. So what we're doing here is we're flipping the figure that we have over a specific line. So in our case today, we're only going to be flipping over the x or y axis. And reflected shapes will be congruent. So if reflections seem a little difficult here, just remember this line is kind of acting just like a mirror, and we're just flipping it around to the opposite. So when you look in a mirror, you're seeing yourself, but kind of backwards, right? So that's what's happening with this line. We're flipping it over so that it's appearing backwards from how it did. So number one here, it's asking us to name the ordered pair for Q. So if we take a look at Q, we've got -1, -2, and -1, -2, -3. So -2, comma, -3. And now we're looking at Q prime. So 1, 2, and -1, 2, 3. So this is 2, -3. So what happened to our x value? Well, if we take a look, we went from -2 to 2, but in reflections case, we're not adding like we did with translations. We're multiplying. So we'll say it is opposite of what it was. And what is happening to the y value? Well, it stayed the same. Nothing happened to the y value, so we're still sitting at -3 for the y value for both of these points. So the rule is going to be kind of like we did yesterday, so we got to say some point x comma y moved when it became -x comma y. So all we did was flip it over that line, the x value. So what if another figure has a point -2 comma 4 and it's reflected over the y-axis? Well, here's where we can apply this rule. So we said -2 comma 4, and we said we are multiplying this by a negative. So -2. And what happens when we take a negative? Well, it becomes positive. So this new point will be at 2 comma 4. So if we're flipping over the y-axis, the x value becomes the opposite of what it was. And then we'll see it later on, but it goes, if we're flipping over the x-axis, it's the y value that's going to become the opposite of what it was. So it's kind of opposing there. If you're flipping over x-axis, the y value becomes opposite. If you're flipping over y-axis, x value becomes opposite. So let's move along here. So we're going to draw this triangle it's asking us to. So we got B is 2, 2, 2, 2. That is B. It's asking us to label, so don't forget to label it as well. C is 5, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. C. And D is 2, comma 6, 2, 4, 6. And this is D. Let me change the position of my labels here. B, C, D. So we have this triangle here. Now it is asking us to reflect and label this over the x-axis. So in order to reflect this, what I need to do is go straight to the x-axis from whatever point I'm worried about. So if I'm doing B first, I'm going to the x-axis, and that's going to be 1, 2 spots. So since I went 2 spots towards the x-axis, I have to go 2 spots away from it in the same direction. 1, 2. So these are always going to be the same distance away from the x-axis as where they were. And then we're moving on to C. So once again, I move C 1, 2 to get to the mirror line that I'm reflecting over. And I have to go 1, 2 more. And that will be my C prime. And then finally D, well, I have to move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in order to get to that x-axis. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on the opposite side of that line, D prime. So new ordered pairs for B prime is, looks like, oh, so don't forget my triangle here. So B prime looks like it is now 2, negative 2. C prime is 5, negative 2. And D prime is 2, negative 6. So remember what I said earlier, now that we're flipping over the x-axis here, it's our y values that become the opposite instead of the x values. So what do we notice happening to the x and y values? I don't have much space here, so we're going to say x is the same, y is opposite. What would happen if we reflected to the x values if we reflected over the y-axis? So remember from up above, x would be opposite, y would be the same. Oh, whoops, that's what it's asking us right here. So I'm going to go ahead and erase that part. Y would be the same. So what would happen to the x values if we reflected over the x-axis? So it's the x values that would be x would be opposite. So remember, in order to actually do the reflection, the easy way, the shortcut way, is to just count to your reflection line, count to the axis that you're reflecting over, however many squares you have to go to get there, and then keep going that same direction in the same number of squares. So just as an example, let's say I'm moving B, C, D again, but over the y-axis. We'll call this double prime since I already have B prime. So if I was reflecting over the y-axis here, I would count 1, 2 for my B, and I keep going, 1, 2. So we're going to call this B double prime because I'm just showing you how we do this again. C, I have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that would be C double prime. And then D, well, in order to get over the y-axis, I have to move it 1, 2. So I would keep going, 1, 2. And there would be my D double prime. So really not too difficult. It's just a matter of remembering that it's opposite here. If you're going over the x-axis, it's your y value that's going to become negative or become the opposite. And if you're going over the y-axis, it will be your x value that becomes negative or becomes the opposite. All right, so let's do the first one of each of these rows here, just so you can get an idea. So, name the new ordered pair if the points were reflected over the y-axis. So remember, when we're doing the y-axis, it's actually the x value that changes. So 3 would become -3 for that first one, and then the other 3 would stay the same. So I change the x value to the opposite because I'm going over the y-axis. Name the new ordered pair if the points are reflected over the x-axis. Well, so remember, it's opposite, so I'm going over the x-axis. So my y value will become opposite. So x will stay the same, and y now will become negative. Or opposite. A negative number would turn back to positive. Alright, so finish up these problems here, and then on Canvas, the next page on Canvas will be the rest of the assignment, so don't forget these problems when you're turning that in. And then after you finish that up, there's also an IXL to get done that has you practicing with actually doing these reflections over the axes. Alright, so if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email or send me a message on Canvas, and I will reply to you as soon as I can to help out with any issues you might be having.